21 or the 23?
About 21 billion.
21 billion
Yes,
Ghana cedis.
Ghana
Covered.
cedis.
Yes, let's proceed.
21 billion, what percentage of GDP is that?
Which
The
GDP?
21 billion overall.
Are you talking 2020 GDP or 2021?
Yes, 2020.
2020 GDP was about 388 billion, and so it's about 1.5%. Do you mind if I use my calculator?
At the chairman's indulgence, we just need the number. I just want COVID as a percentage of GDP in respect of its burden to public debt.
So, Mr. Chairman, is it okay if I calculate on my calculator?
Yes, it is.
Okay. It's about 13%, Mr. Chairman. 13.
Yes, Honorable Soso, you may proceed.
Oh, my apologies. Sorry, that's wrong. That was the total 50 something. Let me just do the 21 divided by 388. It's 5.4%. My apologies, Mr. Chairman.
Now, my very last question again is on the public debt again. It's been reported by Charles Nixon Yeboah on my Joy Online that with the proposed 13 billion facility that government intends to acquire, our public debt is going to increase to 304.6 billion. Now, the biggest worry has been that much of what we borrow ends up in consumption. So at the end of the day, we are not able to invest in critical sector that will lead to development or fixing of the country. And this is against the background that much of national resources is allocated to the office of government machinery. I put this question earlier on to the substantive minister, and I want you to also respond to same. That when you look at this year's budget, the allocation to the office of government machinery rose by 504.87%. That is, last year the allocation was 79,392,760, but this year the allocation is 823,880,668. And this represented about 504.85% increase. For a government that really wants to share burden, do you think it's prudent to allocate this huge sum of money to the Office of Government Machinery, particularly when we are looking for this money for investment in critical sector?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I believe the numbers should speak for themselves. When I'm trying to ascertain the impact of your borrowing and your expenditure, what I look at is the GDP growth, because that is what determines if you've been investing in the productive sectors of the economy, because that is what generates your GDP growth. And between 2017 and 2019, we averaged GDP growth, I think, of excess of 7%. So clearly, we must be doing something right to be able to generate that type of growth in terms of where the monies are going. Now, with regards specifically to the Office of Government Machinery and what they are investing in, and why we are allocating so many funds to them, and that may not be rather than to the productive sectors of the economy. If you look at the breakdown under government of machinery, you realize that we actually do have within there quite a few entities that are involved in the productive sectors of the economy or in infrastructure or capital expenditure. And Mr. Chairman, if you may permit me, this include your microfinance and small loan center, your Nations Builders Corps, your National Identification Authority, your Zongo Development Fund, and last but not the least, your special development initiatives, which was responsible for a lot of the infrastructure that was built across the regions and districts and communities across the country. So I believe the money is going into capital expenditure and into productive sectors. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Very well. Eric.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Honorable nominee, in your answer to an earlier question posed by the Honorable Minority Leader, the question was whether your firm, Blackstar Brokerage Limited, is engaged as a transaction advisor to the Ministry of Finance. And you said no. Is that correct?
Yes. No, the question was asked was, have we ever done business with the Ministry of Finance?
Okay. So the question was different from what I posed?
Yes.
It's different? Okay. Is that firm a transaction advisor to the Ministry of Finance? Your firm?
Blackstar was selected as one of the advisors for the International Capital Markets Program, which include the issuance of the Eurobond. In total, I think there were over 10 firms that were selected. But for the Eurobond issuance, even though they were shortlisted as one of the transaction advisors, they did not participate in the Eurobond issuance, and so therefore did not have any engagement or sign any engagement letter or were paid any fees or did any business with government.
The Bank of Ghana issued a notice to the general public, number BOG/FMD/2021/34, and they stated that the Ministry of Finance, for the records, the date, the letter was signed on the 12th of May 2021, and according to the notice, the Ministry of Finance invited banks and non-banks to apply to be primary dealers and bond market specialists. Your firm applied and has been selected. So as you speak, your firm is one of the investment advisors to the Ministry of Finance. Is that not correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that was what the whole discussion we're having. And the question was in relation to, prior to this, had we ever done business with government? That's when I said no. And this whole issue was what Adongo was referring to, which is what you said, which is the bond market specialist. So that was what we were discussing, and we're discussing whether there was a conflict of interest in the situation.
So are you implying that your company has not been functioning in this capacity with the ministry until this notice?
Exactly. This was the first time.
Okay.
Could just address Adongo well, the honorable member for Bolga, or
my apologies, Mr.
just
Chairman.
Adongo walking like that is not good.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Honorable member for Bolga. I apologize.
Now, because you referred to the honorable member for Bolga Tanga, I also want to refer to some of the statements that he has made in respect to this particular issue. He expressed some fear that based on this, now you're moving into the Ministry of Finance as a minister. And as a Minister of Finance, you know, you sit on the board of Bank of Ghana. Is that not correct?
I don't know if I'll be reappointed, but it's possible.
Okay. So based on that, your company has been selected to serve as investment advisor to the ministry. And you are also going to the ministry as the minister.
He has explained that his company is not an advisor. So let's not go back there.
Mr. Chairman, because you left, I think there's a new development here. The company is an advisor to the ministry. That is a fact.
It's a bond market specialist.
Mr. Chairman, I have the notice here, and the notice is very specific. From Bank of Ghana, it's notice to the public. Let me show it to Mr. Speaker. I've read it. Yeah. I'm reading from the second table. The following institutions out of the PDs, primary dealers, have been selected as bond market firms. Blackstar Brokerage Limited. And that's what I'm saying. And the question I'm posing now is that now he's heading to the ministry. He's going to the ministry as a minister of state.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, if I may clarify, the investment advisory firm there is with a description of the type of firm that it is. The role they are playing is in the header, where it says the following institutions out of the primary dealers have been selected as bond market specialists for the issuance of government bonds. So that's the role they are playing. But they are historically investment advisory firms. That's how they are captured under their license.
The bond market specialist is to advise the ministry on bond matters. That is the work. On bond matters, matters relating to bond. That is what the bond specialist is supposed to do. And therefore, you cannot say that because the firm has been selected as a bond market specialist, that firm is not serving as an advisory firm to the ministry. It's an advisory firm to the ministry by virtue of having been selected as bond market specialist to the ministry.
Please proceed with your question.
Mr. Chairman, are you clear with that?
I don't agree with the interpretation, but proceed with your question.
What exactly is the work of the bond market specialist to the ministry?
The responsibility of the bond market specialist is to go out and sell bonds, government bonds to investors for a commission.
For a commission?
To market and sell bonds to.
Who determines the commission for the bond market specialist?
The commission is, as already stated, it was there and has been there prior to the engagement, because the bond issuance is a process that was started by Mr. Setekpe back in I don't know, it was in the previous government.
So if somebody says that the Minister of Finance, after having the approval and subsequently appointed by the President, somebody states that by virtue of your appointment you have awarded contract to yourself, would you dispute that?
Mr. Chairman, it's very important that I state categorically that I resigned from the board and from the management of Blackstar Advisors at the beginning of 2017. Since then, I've never stepped into that office. I don't involve myself in any of their business dealings or what goes on there. In fact, I didn't even know they had applied for this. So I don't think that will be an accurate description of what goes on if somebody was to say that.
In the absence of the minister, you acted as the Minister of Finance.
I acted as the President's representative.
Invitations for the banks and non-banks to apply as primary dealers and then bond market specialists was issued during that time.
I believe so, but I believe it was issued by Bank of Ghana.
By Bank of Ghana?
Yes, please.
And the notice indicates that the Ministry of Finance did that. The notice states.
If you notice, it's a Bank of Ghana letterhead on the notice.
after undertaking a review of the primary dealer system, the Ministry of Finance invited banks and non-banks to apply. So it didn't come from Bank of Ghana, from the Ministry of Finance under your watch.
My mistake.
As a caretaker.
My mistake, Mr. Chairman. But I didn't know about it. I wasn't involved in the process. It's handled at the director level or below.
Now, when you were the president's representative, this thing happened, but you didn't know. Is that what you're telling the committee?
Mr. Chairman, the Ministry of Finance, there's a lot going on in the Ministry of Finance, and there are a lot of things that are bond market specialists or transaction advisors that goes on without, what the main thing is to make sure that public procurement is involved, and that, you follow the right procedures in the procurement process.
So even when your own firm was applying, you didn't know?
Eric, you're entitled to 3, but you're going on. If you're going to...
Because the majority side is not here, we can
Please, we haven't changed the rules.
But you're not
We haven't changed the rules, so
you are observing.
kindly finish.
Mr. Chairman, I should finish. Okay. So the last question I pose, I ask, you were the president's representative at the time, and your own firm applied to the ministry. You said it was handled at the technical level, the directors, and therefore you didn't know. But when your own firm was applying,
I'm not member. This your own firm thing. He has unsaid it. Let's not repeat it. He says he stopped working for that firm since 2007. Just because I worked at DVLA up to 2017, sorry. It doesn't mean that what DVLA does today, I would have a knowledge about it. That's not fair.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you perfectly. But working for a company, Mr. Chairman, I agree with you perfectly. But working for a company and owning a company are two different things. We are talking about the owner of a company. And you are relating it to you working with DVLA, which is not for you.
I agree. But management of his company would apply. It doesn't mean he would know. The companies are own share in. I don't know what they do.
Man, I agree with you perfectly. So, as the Minister of Finance point, now the fear of the honorable member you mentioned is that with your firm in that capacity and you moving into that ministry, there is going to be conflict of interest that will affect the interests of our nation. What is your position on this?
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned before, I resigned from the board and management of Black Star Advisors in 2017. I have no role and I do not participate in any of their business dealings. In their current capacity as bond market specialists, they are operating purely based on performance, and I have no influence or say in what they do. It is their responsibility to go out and raise money for government when government issues bonds, and they then get paid based on their ability to do so or not to do so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, just a little follow-up. To paraphrase your word, I have no influence in what they do. Will you have an influence as minister in what they get?
In what they what? In what they what?
What they get as business. And that is what will engender the conflict of interest.
No, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes. Does any of the ladies wish to ask a question? Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Nominee. It's already afternoon. Yeah, good afternoon, Mr. Nominee.
Good afternoon, Chair.
And Mr. Nominee, my first question has to do with, ask the question about that. And as at April, I believe, our reserves had gone up to $10.9 billion, right? And it clearly indicates an upward movement, progress in that area. Would you be able to tell this committee, in your view, what is causing the disconnect between this rather positive development and the general hardship that Ghanaians are facing? There's too much hardship in this country. And if this is what the data indicates, why is it not reflecting?
Mr. Chairman, I think we have become a victim of our own success with regards to the management of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think under the exceptional leadership of His Excellency the President, we managed to really tackle the pandemic so well that people do not realize how devastating it was and what the potential ramifications could have been. This led to quite a dire situation, and a lot of people got laid off, a lot of businesses collapsed. I mean, it has been really tough. And I think that hardship is a result of the dark situation that we went through last year. In fact, you know, it could have been a lot worse, and if you go to some other countries and you listen to some of the stories, not only in the loss of lives, but businesses and livelihoods. So it will take us a while to recover, and I think that we are actually on the right path. I think the introductions of the vaccines and the speed with which we brought the vaccines in will help us get back to normal quicker, which will then allow businesses to resume work, the borders to be open fully, and for economic activity to resume. And I believe once that happens, the hardships will be relieved and people will feel better off. With regards to the reserves, I think one thing that helped with the reserves was the fact that imports slowed down. So we didn't have to use a lot more dollars to buy goods to bring in. And it also reflected in the currency being more stable, which was helpful. But that does not really translate into better living conditions, especially given the devastating effect of the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Nominee, during the budget presentation to this House earlier this year, we saw the introduction of new taxes. And one of those was the COVID tax. You are the Ministry of Finance, Deputy Minister. Could the Ministry of Finance have conceived some other ways of raising revenue for government instead of introducing new taxes to further burden the already Ghanaian who is constrained, as you've just conceded, that we are in difficult times. Times are hard for everybody. And then we get bogged down with a lot more taxes. How are we supposed to survive in this country? Are you able to give an indication whether we were really widening the tax net or we just deepening it further? Which one are we at? Which one are we doing, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, revenue mobilization is something that we are aggressively pursuing, and we believe that with digitalization, national ID rollout, we'll be able to expand the tax net. However, in the short term, we urgently needed to identify some revenue source to be able to at least roll out the vaccine to get people back to work and people protected. The only other alternative in the short term was to borrow more. And given our heightened debt levels, we thought that, we needed to find another way to raise the revenue to pay for these vaccines, to be able to make sure that everybody got vaccinated and we could resume, our lives could get back to normal. It was a tough decision, and one that really was one that we struggled to do. And in fact, that is why we also found ways that we thought we could give some tax breaks to some specific sectors of the economy that had been adversely hit, and provide some tax breaks to those areas, including transportation, hospitality, to help try and balance the burden a little bit and alleviate the suffering.
Just a follow-up to your answer, please. How much are we paying for the vaccines?
For what?
The vaccines.
The projection is to be able to vaccinate a total of 70% of the population. If you put the population at 30 million, that means about 21 million people. On average, depending on which vaccine it is that you buy, if we even average $10 per shot, then $20 would be, so you have $20 times 21 million. I think that's about $400 million.
Thank you, Mr. Nominee. My last question is about the African Continental Trade Area. What are the strategies that the Finance Ministry has to enable Ghanaian companies compete effectively within this area? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not, maybe I should have listened to the Trade Minister a little more, but I'm not up to speed on the strategies that we have to attract, to take advantage of this act. What I do know is that it is a really exceptional opportunity. It really creates a big open market across Africa of a lot of people, and I think Africa is a growing market, and it will allow us, if we can trade amongst ourselves, we'll be able to retain more of the value and wealth creation here on our continent.
Mr. Nominee, it's a follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Shouldn't the Finance Ministry by now be considering whether we can get some reduction in the interest rate regime so that Ghanaian companies can borrow, have access to funds? And that shouldn't be the mandate of maybe the Trade Ministry and the Finance Ministry should be talking by now about what each of you can do to help the Ghanaian businesses and companies.
I see. I didn't know that's what you're alluding to. We actually, rates have come. The monetary policy rate was just reduced by 100 basis points. We've also set up a guarantee scheme with the banks so that the banks can give soft loans to companies, especially companies that were in specific sectors that manufacture health-related stuff and others. And we believe that if that is done well, it would help give these companies some working capital at affordable rates to be able to ramp up production and maybe service the wider West African market.
Thank you. Whew. I thought we are good on 6 each. Okay. Yes, first, Tete. Sorry, if I'm trying to remember the first name. Yeah, Gisela. After that, I'll come to Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Honorable nominee, congratulations. The construction sector, so I'm going to my question is centered around that. I'm just looking at the 2020 annual public debt report, and in the details, it is one project after another after another. That sector is the capex. You know, it takes a chunk of the capex of any country, any organization. And yet, the Ministry of Finance, in association with the relevant ministries that undertake these range of projects, I think leave a bit to be desired. And they cost the public more than what they actually signed for. Why do I say this? If you sign for, say, $20 million for a project not executed within the time frame, there's going to be overruns, cost overruns, fluctuations, additional works, so on and so forth, and it costs the taxpayer, you, myself, and all the other taxpayers, much more. What are you going to advise your minister, or what initiatives are you going to take yourself this time to ensure that at the end of 2024, by the time your government is wrapping up to leave, you have not left a deeper and bigger hole in the public debt? Because contractors have to get paid. Their families, they have a whole host of support that they need to take care of. So basically my question is, what are you going to do differently? And also to curb this political equalization, or what do I call it, of not paying particular parties, contractors on time, for them to have, for that to be another story. I hope you know where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, first and foremost, I believe my job description is that I work for Ghanaians, all Ghanaians, and so I'm colorblind. With regards to the construction sector, one thing we introduced, or we kept after the IMF left, was the publication of Appendix 10C, which lists all the projects that we are in the pipeline or intend to do. And we have a cap or a limit on the funding allocation to those projects. So we say for this year we have a $1 billion cap. So all the projects that are in there should sum up to that $1 billion. Now, after that is published, we would not look at any other projects that are not within that 10C table. This serves as a way for us to be able to manage the huge demand coming from various parts, insisting that so and so project be done here, there, and so forth and so on. And hopefully that would then allow us to be able to keep things within budget and keep it and get people paid regularly, because we haven't overextended ourselves and we haven't taken on more than we can chew. So that is one of the processes that we've put in place that has helped very well. So now if somebody calls and says, hey, so-and-so project, first question is it in the budget? Was it a part of the list? And if that is, the answer is no, then we say polite, we say, okay, try again next year, or maybe we can look at it again in the next budget. So it's helped us a lot in managing projects and the list growing. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, follow-up question. I'm not sure that is entirely correct, but if you say so. In my constituency, I have a major road that runs from Swedu to Bodrasi in the central region. I know, because I followed up. The contractor, for example, is owed about 5 certificates. If he doesn't get paid those, how is he going to work? And so for 5 or 6 years, a project that could have been completed within a year runs for 5-6 years. Interest on delayed payments are going to be paid by the same taxpayer, and the people just suffer the inconvenience of a road not being completed. I don't want to mention the social upheaval that can cause for some people, just wondering why a road cannot be completed. At some point, there has to be a stop to things like that. Do you agree?
I agree, 100%.
Thank you. I think you didn't have a choice not to agree. Second question. When you were being vetted in 2017, I watched your previous vetting, and I liked the vim with which you talked about the mobile money market. And there's just a report, BOG Summary of Economic and Financial Data, May 2021, it just came out with the increase. I'll just take a year's change of total value of transactions, 32.8 billion to 83.8 billion. Do we have the necessary regulatory framework in place for such huge transactions, and within 4 years, have you been able to do that? Because you started, I was very excited when you talked about the mobile money, because at that time, it wasn't even as developed as it is now, and in such use as it is now. Have you been able to put that framework in place? Thank you.
We have. I think, it starts with the national ID system. Because, to be able to monitor, KYC, regulate, and oversee this sector, you have to be able to identify everybody. And even though it was in the law that you needed to have a proper ID to register a SIM card, because we hadn't issued IDs, the mobile companies couldn't meet that requirement and use that as an excuse. So now that we've rolled that out, it makes it a lot easier to put it all together. But I think more importantly, what you've seen there, and I looked at those numbers myself yesterday, is also partially an effect of COVID. Because what COVID has done is that it's accelerated the process of digitalization. And, so a lot more people now are using their mobile money accounts to make payments and so forth and so on. So, and that makes it even more urgent for us to be able to monitor and oversee. I think for me, a telling statistic in there is the number of active mobile users. I think the number is about 17 million, whereas about 30 million registered mobile money users. And when I juxtapose that 17 million active mobile money users against a paltry about 1.5 million Ghanaians who pay personal income tax, you realize that the informal economy, assuming that even just half of those 17 million users are economically active, the informal economy is huge, because then that means there's about 8.5 million vis-a-vis 1.5. So as a government, I think that we have a huge opportunity around the revenue mobilization space to really aggressively formalize the economy and able to bring more people into the formal economy to generate more revenue for government, which would then mean that we can borrow less.
So my last question would be, what will Charles Edubuahin want his legacy to be in the financial space?
That we completed the Japan transaction.
You've already scored the negative. I thought you related to your Marcus Garvey and how the Black Star and all those, and black man rising kind of thing. Right, this week. Thank you very much.
Yes, Honorable Ayaga. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Elizabeth, thank you very much. Congratulations, Mr. Edubuahin.
Thank you.
In your answers, you have stated that 21.6 billion of the taxpayers' money was used to clean the banks. Can you also tell us how much money would have been used to save these banks? Look at it anyhow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it was not an issue about money with regards to the banks. Far from it. If it was just a money issue, I'm sure there would have been other issues. There were several issues that these banks had that needed to be dealt with. And some of them were not things that could be fixed with money. Corporate governance issues was one. Related party transactions was another one that was quite serious. Misuse of depositor funds, and several other issues. In fact, there are some cases where you had depositors camping out in banks, halls, and so forth for weeks without being able to receive their money. That was because these monies of theirs had been used by the owners of these businesses to invest in other businesses that were not related to the banks. In fact, there was a case where an owner came into my office and told me that, it was a policy of their bank to invest in related businesses that they owned, because Ghanaians don't pay back their loans anyway, so if they are going to lend, they might as well lend to related businesses. So, you know, the risk mechanism or the credit assessment mechanisms was missing in some of these banks. And so there was no assurance that even if we had given them money, which they had gotten through the liquidity support that Bank of Ghana had provided, they would have been able to turn around the situation. And they were so insolvent, most of them, that it would have taken a lot to be able to bring them out of solvency, which would have required some serious amount of investment. And they had been given a chance by the Bank of Ghana to find that investment, because some of them said, oh, they would find the money because the holes were so big, but they hadn't been able to. And so Bank of Ghana had continued to give them liquidity support, which had gone to a point where they could not recoup even if they wanted to.
Your mic is on. I don't entirely agree with you, but I'll move on to another by stating that liquidity was high on the agenda. And if you look at the reports, you will see that there were instances where the banks were given a certain period of time to turn around, and before they could say jack, their banks were off. And so that's to say that that's not accurate. From your discussion, you've shown that you also are privy to the annual debt report for the 2020 financial year. And you also see that a lot of contractors are owed by the Bank of Ghana, who also owe the banks. So if government owe these banks, and government is not paying them, and they are not liquid, is it not like giving a dog a bad name and hanging it?
Mr. Chairman, I've heard that assertion about the government owing contractors, and I don't want to name names, but I'll give you some examples. There was one where it was claimed that contractors were owed, or the contractors owed the banks about 500 million cedis. But yet, the hole in the bank that needed to be filled was close to 7 billion. And there was also liquidity support from Bank of Ghana, which was in billions. So, even if, and the thing about contractors and what they owe is that the contractor comes in and gets a contract from government and goes and maybe borrows money from a bank to do the work. He typically would not, if he borrows the money to do the work, he gets paid by government, then you go and pay the bank back. Now, depending on the contractual agreement or the agreement with the bank, you know, the payment would go to pay. In some cases, when we looked at, there was one particular bank that the bank claimed that the contractors had come and borrowed. But when we spoke to the contractors, they said, no, they hadn't borrowed any money. And when we asked the bank to give us proof, there was no proof that they were obligors or had entered into a contract. Their names were not, they were not joint, their names were not joined to the contract. Because typically, if you're a bank and you lend money to a contractor on behalf of a government project, the bank will notify us and have their names joined so that when we pay the contractor, we pay into such an account where they're joint holders of the account, so that the bank can hold on to his money before the contractor takes it away or maybe is banking with another bank. So there are quite a lot of instances where we looked at the total exposure to the contractors. We looked at the total liabilities of the bank, how big the hole was, and how much needed to be put in for the bank to come back to life. And that is where the whole insolvency test was done, in terms of that there's a rigorous assessment the Bank of Ghana does to determine if the bank is insolvent or almost insolvent, and if it can be resuscitated or not.
Because you are not using banks as an example, I will resist the temptation to mention any bank and say that it is obvious that the Bank of Ghana owe a lot of contractors who owe banks, because you know that from this report that you've submitted, these contractors are not that liquid to own all the money that they use for these projects. So it goes without saying that these contractors owe banks. And all these are happening because the bank, the Ministry of Finance, always or almost always is unable to pay contractors on time. How are you going to ensure that contractors are paid on time to avert all these? Thank you.
The answer is in revenue mobilization. You know, the reason, if there are any challenges, the ability to generate the revenue to pay the contractors. And as you know, like last year, for example, we had no idea that, you know, COVID was going to hit and our revenues were going to plummet. So even though maybe in the budget we had budgeted X amount to pay road contractors, for example, when your revenue drops by 20-30%, you have to scale back. So some people that should have been paid didn't get paid, and then that accumulates into the next year, and then you begin to have a problem. So the idea is to focus aggressively on revenue mobilization to be able to increase and generate more revenue so that we can, you know, pay people more regularly and on time.
That will be all for him.
Yes, Honorable.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And let me say congratulations to Mr. Honorable Charles Dubois. Mr. Chairman, my first two questions will be follow-ups. Earlier, I heard the Honorable nominee indicate that he was with the President in Brussels. And I just want to find out if he had the pleasure of flying in the 15,000 euros per hour Airbus.
That part is prejudicial. The figures and things is prejudicial. So just ask him whether he was the president or whether he flied in there. The figure you're adding is prejudicial. So
okay, so the figure is a problem. Okay.
Yes.
So I want to find out if he had the opportunity to fly with the president in the Airbus that was chartered for that trip, and if he knows how such chartered flights are often paid for, from where they are paid.
I know, Mr. Chairman, I flew with Air France, and I don't know how or where they pay the charters from.
All right. And the second follow-up relates to another answer that was given in relation to your period as the President's representative at the Ministry of Finance, when the ministry requested the services of these private entities. And according to the responses that you gave, you were unaware, which is understandable, that the request was made by the ministry because it may have been done at the director level. You are also unaware that the company that you used to own also participated and has been shortly listed to become one of the bond specialists. Now, there is an issue of conflict of interest, which is a matter of law. But there's also the issue of good conscience. Even if this is not an issue of conflict of interest, given that your company, the minister's company, were shortlisted as bond specialists, even if it is not a matter of conflict of interest, do you find it not to be against good conscience?
No, the short answer is no, Mr. Chairman.
All right. I'll move on to your previous rules to us. You were on the board of MIDA, the Millennium Development Authority.
Yeah, I served as an alternate to the minister.
Right. And you were on that board during the transaction that saw PDS getting a deal which was later terminated as a result of fraudulent representations. Again, on 6th August 2019, you signed a statement that was after the termination of the deal as Deputy Minister of Finance, outlining steps that had been taken to get ECG to exercise oversight responsibility over the accounts of PDS. What is the state of the revenue accounts and whether this deal did not lead to substantial financial loss to the state? Given how close you were to this transaction, I believe you are in a better position to tell us if it did lead to any losses to the state or not, and especially the current state of accounts as far as revenue collections by PDS was concerned.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know about this revenue account that the honorable member is referring to. I understand that at the time of the PDS transaction, there was a bank that assisted in the transaction, and I believe that revenue collection was routed through that bank post the transaction. So when the transaction was reversed or cancelled, accounts needed to be reconciled and monies restored or reverted back to ECG. I don't know the current situation with regards to the reconciliation of those accounts, but I understand it's something that ECG is doing with the SWAL PDS members.
All right. River Livingston has a PR firm known as the KRL International. Now, this was a company the New Patriotic Party hired for PR before the 2016 general elections. It is said that it was carried on to government to perform same PR functions in a deal with the Ministry of Finance that you signed on behalf of the people of Ghana. As of July 2020, it is assumed that about $900,000 had been paid to this company. The KRL filed a statement with the U.S. Department of Justice in August 2017, claiming it provided lobbying services on behalf of the Ministry of Finance of the Republic of Ghana in April 2017. In fact, that was 2 months before the contract with the Ministry of Finance was signed. Can you tell us why this contract isn't a mere handshake or a thank you package for KRL International for the campaign services it rendered the New Patriotic Party in opposition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I first met Riva when I joined the ministry, and her firm has been very helpful with regards to PR and just assisting navigating the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. During the whole PDS issue, she was very helpful in putting us in front of the bosses of MCC, in writing letters to the Treasury Secretary and to the State Department. we have also just more recently, with regards to even the vaccines, she has been very helpful in getting us in front of the lady in charge of the vaccine rollout in America. I'm sure you've heard that America is sitting on about 60 million doses, which they don't know what to do with. And we are trying to engage to see if we can get a consignment from them of that amount. And so I believe that the services she has provided have been instrumental. She's also been very helpful. We had an issue with OPIC on the Africa Integras project, which was the hostels being put up at the University of Ghana. She has been helpful in the engagements that have gone on.
Chairman, with your permission, I understand that she has been doing some work for the ministry, but my question was in relation to how she was procured and whether this was not just a thank you package, whether this was above board.
It was not a thank you package, Mr. Chairman, and it was totally above board.
Yes, the how she was procured.
Through public procurement agency, I believe, public procurement authority. I think it was sole sourced.
It was procurement, Chairman, with your indulgence. Was it procurement of services?
I believe so, yes.
And you believe that she went through due process? Chairman, did she go through due process to the best of your knowledge?
I believe so. I believe she was hired to do what she does. I mean, she has expertise in that area.
Continue.
Well, the answers are not quite firm. I expected it to be very straightforward, given the fact that he was the one who signed this contract on behalf of Ghana. So I would have liked to know if it was procured through sole sourcing, competitive bidding, or he said sole sourcing. Well, but he wasn't too sure if it was sole sourcing, but that will be considered later on. In your answer to, you talked about the procurement of vaccines. Will you be able to tell us how much money has so far been spent by Ghana on vaccines per dose for Sputnik and AstraZeneca, respectively?
I don't have that number, Mr. Chairman.
Well, but will you be able to get it for us later on?
With regards to AstraZeneca, for example, I know that is being procured through the COVAX initiative. I do not believe the terms and the costs so far have been totally completed, and because it's just the first batch of total quantity. I think the idea is to provide us with 20% of population.
How much does the state owe independent power producers? And when do we intend to make payments to them?
Mr. Chairman, that number is constantly changing because it is based on power produced on a daily basis and on what ECG pays and what the balance to pay is. So I cannot give you a specific number. I do know last year we spent about 6 billion paying independent power producers.
Is it a substantial debt? Because as at I think July last year, you put the figure at about 1.4 billion, which was still undergoing some reconciliation before payments were made. So how much?
I'd expect the number to still be around the same figure.
All right, Mr. Chairman. I'll leave it here.
Thank you very much. Charles Edibuahi, let me join colleagues. I don't know if to congratulate you, but congratulations on your nominations as Minister of State at the Ministry of Finance. We know about the Minister of Finance and what we expect of him, and we know that his deputies will be deputizing for him. What we don't know is what the Minister of State at the Ministry of Finance will be doing. Can you tell us?
Mr. Chairman, it is my understanding that
so basically, the person who nominated you, did he give you a terms of reference that if you go there as Minister of State, this is what you will be doing?
yes, we are to have a more detailed discussion after I'm confirmed with regards to the definite role to play. But, Mr. Chairman, as you know, they've been ministers of states appointed in the past and assigned to the Ministry of Finance. I think that is because of the heavy workload at the Ministry of Finance. So I understand my job to be to assist the Minister for Finance in the performance of his duties.
So you are going there as Assistant Minister? It's the man himself who is saying that he understands that he's going there to assist the Minister of Finance. So I have to find out whether he is Assistant Minister.
That you have not created any such position. Neither has the President created any such one. He's been nominated here as Minister of State at the Ministry of Finance.
Yes, because I am to vet him, and I need to know my terms of reference in terms of vetting him. If he had come as Deputy Minister of Finance, I would know that he's going there to assist the minister. So I know my limitations in terms of questioning. But he's not the minister, and he's a Minister of State at the Ministry of Finance. So I want to know what kind of questions I can ask him.
Don't worry, you can end it here since you don't know what questions to ask him.
Okay, I have something to ask him about, and it is from his own statements. He said, one thing he said is that he wants to leave a legacy of having achieved the implementation of the securitization of our mineral resources. Even though it is called Agyapong, but in principle it is securitization of mineral resources. The first effort, which largely was led by you, was not successful. President, in a State of the Nation address, did indicate to us in Parliament that he will bring it back. And you want it to be your legacy. What will be different about Agyapong this time that makes you think it will succeed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, first, I think it's important that we differentiate between resources and royalties. You know, it is a securitization of our mineral royalties and not resources. Because when we say resources, people think we are just giving our resources away. But that's not the case. It's just a tax revenue stream, which is our royalties that we are securitizing. So, and I think those are some of the reasons why we have faced some challenges the first time around. I think the public education was not done well, and the stakeholder consultation should have been broader and more deeply done. I think we've listened to the people, we've listened to their concerns, we've gone back and amended some of the agreements with regards to some of the clauses, and even the conditions for all the board members in terms of the independent directors and what they can or cannot do. So I think you will see a resubmission of agreements that reflect some of the sentiments raised by the people. Also, I think this time around we'll give the Finance Committee a whole week to review the agreements before we sit on it, so that we can make sure that everybody has had the time to go through all the documentation thoroughly and make sure that it's well critiqued.
Okay. From your answer to Honorable Suhini's question about the lobbyist, you said you met her at the ministry. You met her at the ministry. But he's saying you signed her contract, her service contract. So did you just meet her at the ministry, or you procured her services at the ministry whilst you were there?
I wanted to clarify that point. I signed an extension of a service contract. It was not the original contract, as I understand.
So you signed an extension of a contract, a service contract?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Now, Honorable Adongo, MP for Bolga Central, has been raising issues about the roles of two companies, one in which you are associated with and the other is associated with the Minister of Finance. From all indications, you have managerially severed relationships with your company, and so we are told also in relation to the Minister of Finance. Honorable Adongo's contention, and I want you to explain this, Honorable Adongo's contention is that your companies or companies in which you have shares stand to benefit anytime government is borrowing. So there is a great danger that you will be a borrowing promoting ministry once you have the two of you heading the ministry, because anytime we borrow, you make money. What is your response to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, and I think the ministry tried to respond to that. Our borrowing requirements are in strict accordance with the appropriation bill and with the budget. That is what determines how much we borrow and from where, whether domestically or internationally. And that is the rule. If we do anything other than that, we can be sanctioned. So I believe that those checks and balances are in place to ensure that we do not do anything untoward.
So in fact, you are saying that if you go a borrowing, it will be because Parliament has authorized you to go borrowing.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned earlier as well, we run a deficit economy, and this is quite common these days. A lot of countries run a deficit economy. And so long as we do run a deficit economy, meaning our expenditures exceed our revenue, we are obligated to borrow to make up the difference. So borrowing is to be expected. The question is, the important thing is to get approval from Parliament and the appropriation bill passed, and to get permission to do it.
I don't have many opportunities to ask questions, but there's one matter that I am very concerned about, which has to do with financing of infrastructure development at the district, municipal, and metropolitan levels. Central government financing doesn't get there. District Assembly Common Fund allocations, very negligible. Swami, for instance, and I have no intention of drawing the leader into this discussion. No, Swami, I'm more focused on Swami. Swami is in the center, the heart of Kumasi, very busy location. The kind of monies that you send to district assemblies, I don't see how that can impact on infrastructure development at that level. And yet, the boisterous economic activity there could pay for infrastructure there. And the rest of us in the country don't need to be burdened with the cost of infrastructure for people carrying out economic activity in Swami. Have you thought through a mechanism of infrastructure levy at the local level? Because I've seen in the UK, in London, they have a municipal, infrastructure levy in some important local government areas in the UK. So they pay for major infrastructure projects using municipal infrastructure levy. Is this something that we could think of as a way of helping the district assemblies out? I just came from my constituency. Some bridges got damaged due to water from the rains, and they don't even have 10,000 Ghana cedis in their account to fix anything.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think the first thing to do there is to get a municipal finance bill passed so that each municipality has its own balance sheet and has its own sort of almost like board of directors who can then identify revenue generating opportunities and also capital expenditures required for their municipality. And some of the revenue generating opportunities include property taxes and property rates. I think that is so fundamental that we get that fixed. As you can see, under the auspices of the Vice President, we are rolling out digital IDs, addresses for all buildings and structures. On the back of that, we'll be able to do a proper valuation of these buildings and apply the right tax. This tax revenue is near to the benefit of these municipalities who can then reinvest them in the infrastructure that these communities badly need in order for us to be able to move it forward. So I think that the first step is really the municipal finance bill to get that passed. We also, but don't have to be worried that we don't create a situation where now the municipalities start just borrowing willy-nilly and end up getting bankrupt, which has happened in some states and cities in the States. So it's a careful balance, and we just have to make sure that the law is very tight and that the governance structures are correctly put in place to mitigate any potential abuse of the system.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Leadership now. Oh, is that right? Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I'm just starting from where my colleagues earlier left. When he was talking about the blaster advisors, and he said it's a number of subsidiaries under it. One that is in this contention is the blaster brokerage. In his explanation earlier, he said they are primary dealers. Is that right, Honorable Charles?
They are part of the primary dealers list. Yeah.
And therefore, he said if they were advisors, they will have negotiated a price with the ministry, but with the PDS or the PDs, they simply run a commission on what they've been able to sell. Is that right?
Yes, as bond market specialists under the PDs, yeah.
I'm coming to the bond market specialists. The BMS, they are specialists.
Yes, please, Mr. Chairman.
How different is a specialist from an advisor?
The role of the specialist is described as the marketing, distribution, and sale of bonds. There's no advisory role in that definition.
So if you are selected as a bond market specialist for a ministry, doesn't it automatically entail advising?
I guess, I mean, if your opinion is solicited on any issues as an expert in the field, you may be called upon to they may ask you what questions, what do you think about interest rates, or if, the bond issuance will be successful, or what type of tenor should be issued. Yes, there may be some, but you have to recognize that you don't want, if you ask the bond market specialist to give you advice on what to sell, most likely he's going to give you advice to sell something that will be easy for him to sell, that is paying a high interest rate and so forth and so on. So that's why there's a clear differentiation between the advisory role and the sale and distribution role. With sale and distribution, you're giving a product, or you're giving a product, and your job is to go and sell it and convince people to buy and raise money that way.
So, Mr. Chairman, are you suggesting that if you are selected as a bond market specialist, you will be strictly be paid based on how much you are able to raise, and there will be no any other fee apart from that?
Absolutely. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, let me move away from there. You serve on the National Lotteries Authorities board, which you call the Game Commission, right?
Gaming. Oh yes, Mr. Chairman. I serve not on the National Lotteries Board, no, but on
gaming. The Gaming Commission.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
That regulates National Lotteries Authority.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And most of the activities you more or less supervise. Most of the activities, is that right?
Most of whose activities?
The National Lotteries Authority.
Not really, Mr. Chairman.
So you don't have much information about what they do?
Not at all, Mr. Chairman.
But as Deputy Minister of Finance, then the National Lotteries Authority works under the Ministry of Finance, right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, but it was not part of my portfolio as the Deputy Minister.
Oh, it wasn't part of your portfolio?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And you didn't have any interest there?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Do you know KGL, KGL Tech Ghana Limited?
No, Mr. Chairman.
You've not heard the name before?
I believe it came up at my minister's vetting.
Oh, that was the first time you heard it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Interesting. You know, Get Fund took a loan of 1.5 billion US dollars.
My understanding is Get Fund got approval to raise up to $1.5 billion, but they did not.
Up to 1.5
yes.
billion dollars for infrastructure.
Yes, but they haven't raised the full amount.
Yes, because there are challenges in disbursement. Are you aware?
Sorry, disbursement to who?
Disbursement to contractors who have done genuine work for Get Fund, and this fund that they need to draw, they always have challenges. Are you aware there's this delay?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Are you aware of Dachi funds?
Yes, I am aware, Mr. Chairman.
What was Dachi funds meant for?
Dachi Fund was a vehicle that was created to securitize Get Fund levies in order to raise a bulk sum of money to pay for education infrastructure.
And do they run that at a commission, right?
They
are paid fees.
Who?
Dachi funds.
Yeah, the administrators of Dachi Fund will be paid some administrative fees, yes.
You have an idea how much it is?
No, Mr. Chairman, I don't know.
Dachi Fund, do you know the directors, any of the directors?
I believe Stephen Asiming is one of the directors.
Are you related to any of the directors?
No, not that I know of.
Do you have any interest in the Dachi Fund?
Not at all, Mr. Chairman.
Not even a friend?
Well, I know Mr. Stephen Asiming. Yes.
And you think that the creation of the Dachi Fund was not an impediment on Get Fund's ability to disburse and pay contractors faster?
Not at all, Mr. Chairman. To the contrary, actually, because what Dachi Fund did was create a situation where instead of waiting for the levies to come in drips and drabs, based on when they came in, this was a way where a bulk sum of money could be raised immediately so that contractors could be paid on time so that they could complete the education infrastructure.
Mr. Chairman, I want to find out from the nominee. Earlier you were asked a question about PDS and your role as the, you said alternate member, governor on the media board.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
But you were mostly representing the Minister of Finance.
Yeah, when he couldn't make it for meetings,
Yes, but most of the time you were there instead of the Minister of Finance. You've attended more of the meetings than the Minister of Finance, am I right?
I believe so. Yes, Mr.
And therefore you were more conversant with the issues there, probably more than the Minister of Finance, apart from your briefing to the Minister.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So what really went wrong with PDS?
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that the guarantee, insurance guarantee that was obtained was not valid. And so therefore, it put the assets at risk in case anything was to happen. And if it was not valid, then that means the whole contract was invalid and hence had to be cancelled.
And Mida, what due diligence did you do on those guarantees when they were submitted and you all agreed that PDS should be selected? What due diligence was done?
I do not recollect what due diligence was done. I do recollect that there was a transaction advisor who should have done the necessary due diligence.
Earlier you were asked a question, but I didn't get the answer clear. So forgive me if I'm repeating that question. Did we lose money in the PDS deal?
No, actually we averted the possibility of losing money by if the assets, if something had happened to the ECG assets.
Are you aware that there was an account that the PDS directors were supposed to hand over to ECG that has not been done, and therefore there's a money sitting in there that technically should have gone to ECG?
Yes, as I mentioned, there were some accounts that needed to be, reconciliations that needed to be done to transfer the accounts back to ECG. And from what I know, that reconciliation exercise is still ongoing. And that's my understanding of where the situation is. But it's not, nobody has lost any money. It's just a reconciliation issue.
Well, if that money is sitting there for, my memory serves me, even over a year since the PDS agreement got terminated, and up to now, reconciliations have not been done, and that money is sitting in this account. You don't think that that's a loss to us as a state?
No, Mr. Chairman, hopefully it's earning some interest.
Are you hoping or you are sure that it's earning interest?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know for sure, but I can check.
So if it's not earning interest, are you going to demand interest?
I should think so.
Is that an assurance? That
Mr. Chairman, I can ask ECG to request that any monies, if they're sitting there, should,
Is that account an interest yielding account?
I have no idea whether it's a current account or is a.
I mean, you pushed me into this when you said you hope that it was earning interest. So I wanted to know whether it was a deputy minister of finance and a very active one. So I was not expecting him to be hoping, but maybe he will. Mr. Chairman, I want to find out from the nominee whether he's aware of Strategic Mobilization Limited.
That also came up at the minister's vetting.
Oh, and so you were glued to your screen watching your minister's vetting.
Yes, Mr.
And since then, you've not found out what they are doing and what they are involved in?
I understand they are involved in some avenue of revenue assurance with the Ghana Revenue Authority.
So you don't know much about the activities?
No, Mr. Chairman. Revenue was not under my portfolio.
Chairman, thank you very much. Yes.
Honorable nominee, you know, you've answered questions on your membership on some few boards. Do you think that ministers or deputy ministers appropriately are to sit on statutory boards, given the situation you find yourself? Sometimes you are made to take responsibility for perhaps something that you've really not been involved in. Would you want to say that we should do away with that regime?
It's a tough one. I think it's a tough one. It depends on the particular situation, Mr. Chairman.
Because you see, some questions were floated about Bank of Ghana, and I could see your real worry, management decisions. Then somebody says, but you were on the board. But you and I know that being on the board, those management decisions, don't come to your attention. So going forward, I know we legislate, where we say a minister or his rep and all that. Given the situation you find yourself, what is your position on that? Would you want to anyway go back to serve on any board?
Ideally, no, but I think it is also our responsibility as, almost a fiduciary responsibility as keepers of the public purse to be able to have some insight at the corporate governance level into some of these areas, insofar as it affects policy.
Now
Sir, Mr. Chairman. Oh no, I was.
Now this COVID situation we find ourselves. Obviously, government expected revenue is not getting to the levels that would help the economy, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
If you securitize for the purpose of growing the economy, Ghanaians express concern, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And when you borrow, Ghanaians express concern, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Meanwhile, there is a legitimate expectation for infrastructure development to go on in the economy, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So don't you think that there is a communication gap? Because earlier in the Agyapong discussion, you conceded that there was a real communication issue. Don't you think that with all these situations that you find yourself, the time has come for the finance ministry to be much more proactive in explaining, yes, in respect of Agyapong, I'm looking at it in general terms, in explaining the urgent need to balance the need to do projects. Look at what the Fix the Country, advocacy was saying. Fix the country. We need roads. We need schools. We need this and that. Legitimate. But these things must be funded. And when you are doing it too, like the Agyapong, you say, hey, don't. We don't want that. Don't you think that a lack of proper communication from your outfit has resulted in some of these things? And if you concede on that, do you plan as part of your mandate in assisting your minister to proactively pursue that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think at the Finance Ministry, we've been so involved in doing our work and meeting the challenges that we have maybe slipped on the communication and the PR side of it. And because of that, we are actively looking to engage somebody who is very familiar with matters of finance as well as communications to assist us in being able to disseminate the message better and be a little more proactive. I think you also will see that more recently we've been a little more actively engaged when it came to the development bank and so forth and so on in communicating, and even with response to the Fix the Country agenda. I think we are all suffering from the after effect of the pandemic and the devastating blow that is taking on the country. And we all have to work together to come out of it and, put all of us, our shoulders to the wheel. I also think we need to revive the whole Financial Literacy Week in order to go across the country and help educate everybody on finance and some of the issues. Because sometimes, we don't break down the issues well for the average person to understand and appreciate some of the challenges we are facing. And so the expectations are different. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Finally, so that leader can take over. Our colleague Honorable Adongo, who is a member of the Finance Committee. You know him very well.
Yes, I thought I did, Mr. Chairman.
Don't you think that with your explanation to this committee, clearing some misconceptions out there, it would be appropriate to engage him, on some of the issues that he contends with?
Honorable Leader,
yes, sir.
Please don't answer. That's an advice you can give him outside. If you have another question.
Yes. Okay, Chairman, let me put it right. Do you think that it would be proper to reach out to MPs on issues concerning your ministry, even when they have not come to your attention officially, so that some misconceptions could be cleared without they becoming fully blown out? Going forward, would you adopt that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I've always been very willing and keen to engage with members of Parliament, especially members of the Finance Committee, and will continue to do so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please, I'm done. I'm grateful.
Yes, ranking member.
Chairman, thank you very much once again. I believe I'll join you in congratulating the nominee and trust that he has accepted that we can do the changes to his name to reflect what is in the CV other than what is communicated to us from the office of the president. And just as a follow-up to a question asked by the Honorable Mahama Yarga, you intimated that once there is deficit, expenditure exceeds revenue, there is likelihood to be borrowing. Are you suggesting that it's only through borrowing that you can deal with your fuel challenges? What of the option of tax adjustment?
What adjustment? Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so the deficit is your revenue less your expenditure. So any tax adjustments will be captured in the revenue side of the equation. So that's why.
So borrowing is your only option?
Yes, because you've exhausted all the other options in your revenue generation, and that's what's captured on your revenue side. So
I don't want that reputation to follow you. You've worked some encouraging knowledge of finance. What about public-private partnership? Will you call that borrowing as an alternative? I'm just saying that is borrowing your sole alternative?
No, I mean, you can sell assets, equity, you can raise equity funding from the sale of assets and privatization.
Yes, so that appears satisfactory. Follow up to Honorable Suhine, this KRL International US-based PR firm, you said you only extended an original contract. You want to avail to us what the original contract was about, the terms and conditions of it that you had to further extend?
I believe it was the same. It was just that it was for a certain period of time which had expired. So
We are not just interested in time for execution. We are interested in responsibility. What were they to do and for what? And what was its benefit to the state? You want to speak to that?
Their responsibility was to help us with public relations with regards to the American government.
You know the exact period when this extension was done?
I do not recall left off the top of my head, Mr. Chairman.
Lobbying may be lawful in America. Is it lawful in Ghana?
I believe it is. It's just called something else.
Now, this committee is called something else. So I've noticed something else. The Honorable Muntaka just asked you, road contractors, get fund contractors. When was the last time government paid some money to road contractors? You have an idea? Not from the road fund, but from the central government GOG finance projects, and not 10 key.
I believe some payments were made at the end of the first quarter, Mr. Chairman.
Do you have a nominee on the road fund board, the Ministry of Finance?
Not that I know of, Mr. Chairman.
The get fund.
My apologies. I believe Yvonne Kwanzaa sits on the road fund.
I take your first answer.
I'm sorry.
And that's noted. The Dachi that the Honorable Muntaka referred to, you don't think that it was a needless stumbling bureaucracy between GET Fund and your ministry and the Minister for Education? Why did you need a Dachi after you said that you needed to borrow up to 1.5 billion? Must they necessarily go through that? Because some payments too will be made to Dachi, unless you are just saying that it was another job for boys created. Why did you create that structure in between those governance institutions established?
The structure was necessary because it allowed us to issue bonds and thereby actually gave us quite a bit of savings with regards to the interest rates. Initially, we had tried to raise the 1.5 billion just by doing a loan facility with a couple of the banks. And the rates they were charging were quite high and reflected the risk they perceived in GET Fund as the borrower. By using a bond structure, it created a situation where there were trustees, there was a custodian, there was a prospectus that had been lodged and registered with the SEC, there was an administrative entity that was overseeing that, and there was clear line of sight to the levies and how they proceeded through to pay and service the bonds. This allowed us to issue the bonds at a much cheaper rate.
Thank you, Chair. You were in Brussels with the President. I heard you in a response to an earlier question. Did you by chance minutes on any official document or correspondence in the exchange between the European Bank and the State of Ghana with your signature?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Who did?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Was the one who executed the financing agreement?
Yes, Mr.
That
Chairman.
will be brought before Parliament.
Yes, Mr.
Not
Chairman.
you.
Yes, Mr.
And you don't act in any capacity as President representative at the Ministry of Finance in that meeting in Brussels.
Please, what was the question? I mean,
What role did you play?
Oh, I was there as a special advisor.
So the document that was exchanged
Yeah.
in respect of the borrowing for the development bank, did you play any role?
Yes, as a spectator.
You went there with taxpayers' money. That was not the Chelsea. That was not the Chelsea Man City final you went to watch, Charles. So you couldn't have been a spectator. So you didn't initial. I just wanted for a record.
No, Mr. Chairman, I did not.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs did.
Yes, Mr. of Foreign Affairs, sir.
And to Honorable Suhini's question, you were not in the cozy flight with the President.
No, Mr. Chairman.
You fly differently.
Yeah, I flew commercial, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that's noted for our purposes. Now, COVID and its debilitating effect on the economy. What do you intend to do to assist government to improve the performance of the economy beyond COVID as your footprint?
I think the first order of business is really to get everybody who wants to be vaccinated, and even if they don't, because it's only there that we can restore confidence in getting people back to work and productivity back on track. And especially when we see around and third waves and fourth waves and how they erase any gains that have been made. I mean, India is a classic example. So that is number one priority, Mr. Chairman. And I think it also would send the right signal to outsiders that, you know, we know what we are doing, and that we are ready and open for business, and that should help resuscitate the tourism sector as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. So between 2017 and yesterday, how much has President Nana Addo Dankwa added to the public debt stock?
I don't know the exact...
No, he answered it differently. I know, I brought it. He quoted 292. I heard him. I wonder how much is added to the debt stock. He is the Minister of Finance. You have that? For Chairman to understand, I needed that to ask you a further question. How much you are spending on debt service for the period 2020 and 2021? You want to provide that detail? That's the basis of my first question. Thank you, Chair.
I believe in the budget for 2021, the debt service cost is about 35 billion cedis.
35 billion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So compared to 2016, is it high or low?
I presume it's higher, given the fact that the debt levels are
compared to President Akufo-Addo in 2008, is it high or low?
I expect it to be higher, Mr. Chairman.
So when you relate to the Ghanaian public and give an impression with your ministry that borrowing was more under President Kufuor, under President Mills, under President John Dramani Mahama, and low under you, what the Ghanaian taxpayer need to appreciate, which is part of the communication that Deputy Leader referred you to, in terms of nominal figures, you are paying more on debt service. Is that the case? Nominal.
I mean, I think if we put it into context, because you can also say, what was the GDP under President Kufuor or President Mills, and what is it now? Is it higher or lower? And the GDP is also much higher. And that is why we look at ratios rather than absolute figures, because it's all relative. And we also have to be cognizant of the fact that it's also the rate of borrowing that may be of concern, not the nominal amount, because it is relative to, one, your growth, and two, the amount of productivity gains you've generated from how you spend the money you borrowed.
Chairman, this one is just to tease out the minister's mind. There was an instance where money had to move from the New York bank to Ghana, and it moved via South Africa from a haircut to Ghana. Do you have any knowledge of it, where in any instance that money had to move from the New York bank and it was facilitated through the Ministry of Finance to Ghana through a South African bank? Do you have any knowledge of that?
I have no knowledge at all about that.
For our record, no knowledge.
No knowledge, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Chairman, I should be ending with Agyapong, the nominee. So Charles back, Agyapong back. You follow the president's heels. You have a Herculean task convincing me and many of my colleagues in supporting Agyapong. We have heard you publicly even attempt to make efforts as a government to equate or relate Agyapong to what was proposed by Minister Dufour at the time when he sought to deal with the Ashanti Gold. Now, clear distinction, and I want that for you from the record. Mineral Development Fund, 50%, off-taker 50%, cannot be the same thing as an entity owned 100%. Is there a difference between the two? Where in one instance, the government of Ghana still remain the 100% owner, and in another instance, the government is giving out some 49% out. Can they be the same in terms of scrutinizing or monetizing royalties of minerals?
They are one and the same, Mr. Chairman. The Minerals Income Investment Fund owns the mineral royalties 100%. The Ghana Gold Company that before was contemplating on setting up was going to be assigned the royalties 100%. That's the same way. It goes on further to say in the presentations on Ghana Gold Company that the company would have the right to issue shares or loans on the back of these royalties. So therefore, there was the possibility that other shareholders will come into Ghana Gold, thereby reducing the shares owned by government from 100% to whatever number. Same way that the Minerals Income Investment Fund, which is 100% owned by government, was going to create a special purpose vehicle and through that issue shares. And that
you are there. How much was the special purpose vehicle to hold from the Mineral Development Fund? Was it 100% on the basis of what you submitted to Parliament?
To start off with, the special purpose vehicle was going to be 100% owned by the Mineral Income Development Fund. And then it will do an initial public offering and sell up to 49% of the shares, depending on the amount of money.
So at least you agree that in terms of percentages, that has been equaled into a majority of 51 and 49, and that is not comparable to where you have wholly owned 100%. Am I right?
No, I disagree, Mr. Chairman.
Explain further to convince
MIF
me.
will still be 100% owned by government, just as Ghana Gold was going to be 100% owned by government.
Is it the Mineral Development Fund which will be the 100% owned or the special purpose vehicle?
The Minerals Income Investment Fund, to which government's royalties were to be assigned, will be 100% owned. They would then create a subsidiary, which would then be the listed subsidiary. And that subsidiary will be assigned some of the royalty flows
from the 100%. Is that the case?
100% owned by MIF.
How much of the 100%?
MIF would have assigned some specific 16 royalty flows from 16 mines were to be assigned to the special purpose vehicle out of the total royalties that MIF will get.
Transfer to this. I want the record
Yes.
I want it for the record. MIF will transfer what percentage of it to the special purpose vehicle?
MIF will own the special purpose vehicle 100%.
And the special purpose vehicle will transfer how much of it to investors who are interested in it?
Up to 49%.
Up to 49%?
Yes, Mr.
Not the whole 100%?
No, Mr. Chairman.
And that will not be the state again. Anyway, so take note of that. You have a difficulty convincing me. My research tells me that about 4% of our national revenue, which is a contribution to our gross national product, comes from mineral revenue. And that's significant for us. My research further tells me that whether you have scrutinized or monetized it or not, the state of Ghana comfortably will make $130 million US per annum on those mineral resources. What is it that you want just 500 million or 1 billion and not more, and not more? What's romantic about the state wants to borrow up to 1 billion when the value of our mineral resources as quantified is in billions of US dollars? You have any explanation to that?
As I was saying, that the challenge with development is that you require access to large amounts of capital. For example, if you look at the oil and gas sector, to bring a field into development, it could cost you anywhere from between $3 to $5 billion. I think Sankofa was around that amount. So it creates a barrier to entry for Ghanaians and people who don't have access to that kind of financing. We have a similar situation in the mining sector where you have a lot of Ghanaians who have mining concessions but can't raise the capital needed for exploration and development to start mining. Through MIF, the intention was to be able to raise a large amount of money upfront on the back of these royalty flows and use these to support entrepreneurs and Ghanaians who want to develop businesses in the mining sector. It is unfortunate that even after mining gold for the last 100 years, we can't point to one Ghanaian that is owner of a big mining company and a multi-billionaire. Whereas when you go to South Africa,
will you facilitate that? Should we look up to you providing leadership in ensuring Ghanaian participation in the sector?
If you approve a Japa deal, for sure.
Oh, conditional on a Japa?
Because we need that to raise the capital to invest in the...
the state can raise the money if it wants to support an individual. Chairman, I'm ending. Now, you have any plans to addressing unemployment in the country?
Pardon? Sorry.
Unemployment in the country. Do you have any plans?
Yes, we do, Mr. Chairman. I mean, unemployment amongst the youth is very challenging and is of big concern to us. The key is to generate or create jobs. We can do so through making sure that the private sector is back to work. They have access to affordable, cheap credit so they can grow their businesses and generate employment.
And then, Chairman, finally, is because I know that the majority leader is here, I just wanted to share your view on Article 1815. 1815. This article shall, with the necessary modifications by Parliament, apply to an international business or economic transaction. You want to give me a distinction between a loan, international business, and economic transaction? And Chairman, I end it there. Thank you for the indulgence. But I'd like to hear from the nominee. Thank you.
Are you able to provide the interpretation he is asking for?
No, I'm totally lost. I can't provide interpretation.
Oh, Chairman, I can reread the words for him. They are from the Constitution, Article 1815. No, I'm not saying you should interpret. I just want to know, working at the Ministry of Finance, economic transaction. Chairman, let me refer to the exact text to protect myself. It says international business, economic transaction, loan agreement. You want to give me an explanation what your understanding of this is, as distinct and separate as used in the Constitution? Where is your brown bag? Are you the acting nominee?
I would have to try and read it within the context of which it was stated, and I'm sure I'll need some legal advice on how to interpret it.
Very well. Thank you, Honorable Ranking Member. Honorable nominee, I have two questions. One, you have said that we used how much? 21 billion in the banking sector cleanup. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Very well. So kindly share with us exactly what was that money used for?
The majority of the money went to pay depositors.
I want to understand that. When you say it went to pay depositors, what does it mean? Because I think that part has not been explained to Ghanaians. That I put my money in the bank and then you have to borrow to pay me. Why?
Because the monies had disappeared, Mr. Chairman. I mean, a lot of depositors were finding it very hard to withdraw their hard-earned monies that they had deposited with these banks. And they had caused a situation where there were runs on banks, people were demonstrating and sleeping in banks requesting their money. When somebody comes to place his money or deposit his money with you, it's with the assurance that anytime he needs it, he can get it. And the only reason why they were not being able to obtain the money was because the money was not there. So when these banks were declared insolvent, a lot of them there was no cash or there was no ability to pay the depositors. And depositors stood the risk of having all their lifetime savings disappear. So government had to step in and make funds available to replace their deposits so that they would be made whole.
In effect, what you're saying is that the monies that individual depositors placed in the banks had been either misappropriated or in any way not available to the depositors. So government had to borrow to pay the depositors instead of the banks. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So when we say we have collapsed banks, it means what we're in fact saying is that the bank owners and managers had misappropriated people's funds and government had to come in to pay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Very well. Well, however it is, let me ask him if what it means is that those we gave the money to could not give the money back somehow, and government had to step in. Well, when you say some have claimed that, and I think Honorable Jare asked the question, what percentage in the portfolio were monies the banks, where banks had lent to contractors in particular from all the exercise to date? What percentage of the total debt were monies that could have been legitimately claimed from contractors, both loan and interest?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have that number available to me, but I can just give you one example where the exposure to contractors was about $500 million, but the hole or the gap that was to be closed was about $7 billion in one instance, which means that it was about less than 10% of the total exposure. So just one
Honorable
example.
Minister, I'm interested in this because we are speaking to Ghanaians to whom so much has been said, but very little explanation has been offered.
Right.
So when you say whole, and what you're saying is that but depositors' monies that could not be accounted
amounted to
for
about 7 billion.
was about 7 billion.
Yes. Compared to about
the
500 million that was
right.
due
The money that
contractors.
the bankers could have claimed was just from
500 million.
contractors.
Yes.
Was in total about
500
million.
Yes, please.
Is that right?
Yes, please. Mr.
Right.
Chairman.
Okay. So I'll go to number 2. When you say deficit economy, can I substitute saying that, or in effect what you're saying is that for all the things we need as a country, we don't have sufficient resources or sufficient money to provide for them. And so we borrow to provide them. That's what you mean by deficit economy. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So if you come to Bekwai, how can I explain to the people of Bekwai that their total revenue, all the money we collected, cannot pay for the 10 kilometers of asphalt road that they have enjoyed in the last year? Who is explaining that to them? Should that be my responsibility as MP, or should that be the MCE, or who in the ministry will explain to them that these things we are providing for you, we are borrowing money to provide for you, and it is your duty to pay over a period? That is the meaning of taxation.
I think it's our collective responsibility as leaders of the country to relay that message to our constituencies.
Very well. These things are important because the accusation all over is that politicians are stealing money, and that's why we are borrowing. We are spending public funds. We accuse one another when actually we should be explaining the source of borrowing. So that's why I think that we should now cut out some of these arguments and explain generally that to invest. Very well. Thank you for attending upon the House to answer questions. That will be all for me. I noticed that the Honorable Minister for Finance entered just at the tail end of the vetting. Thank you for coming to support your Minister of State, but you came in rather late. I hope that cost you some some bottles of beer for members.
Mr. Chairman, is lunch served? Or
Sorry?
is lunch served?
Lunch is served, yes. You are invited. All right, thank you, honorable members. That should be the end of the consideration of the Honorable Charles Adubahe as Minister of State for Finance. I suggest that the photo session be taken outside of here, please. The photo session is done outside of here, please.
Asampa yetia obanyansapo so wo bunibia won kana asam te mafutu sam kakre wa supeme yo kofi o man ya woman o man ya mama na yenyi baby ako
When he comes, take your seat. To the Honorable Benito Ousubio.